Welcome to the Miata Kingdom, Mike's Place, Miata Mecca, your source for parts, information for upkeep and restoration of your Mazda Miata. Your name might be on the title. It might be parked in your garage, but I'm the owner because I'm the king of Miatas. Today we're going to take a look at how to take the oil pan off an NA, NB Mazda Miata with the engine in the car. To do that, we're going to drop the subframe. Peter, a good friend of ours, you might remember him. He's actually done a lot of production work for us on some of our videos. He has a website called MX-5 Unleashed.com. And you might have followed some of the threads about Peter. Peter's actually on his second Miata. His first Miata was total, and we've salvaged a lot of the parts off his first Miata. It was turbocharged, and he's slowly been putting the parts from the first car into his second Miata. But during that job, when he was drilling the hole in the oil pan for the oil return from the turbo, he nicked the oil pickup tube. And because of that, we're going to have to drop the oil pan and replace the oil pickup tube. Now, a little information about Peter. Peter was in the Navy for 4 years, and during that time he was on an aircraft carrier, and he worked on the F-14 fighter jets. He was a hydraulic and an airframe technician. He also worked on the flight deck. He was the fellow that you see in the flame-proof suit with the helmet on and the flag, a little bitty flag, that flags the jets when they take off. So he's standing right next to the jet, and I think they actually chain them down so they don't get blown off the aircraft carrier. Now I can only imagine what kind of rush that is after standing next to a dragster at the drag strip when they take off. Now Peter's technology, his knowledge about those fighter jets is carried over into his car, and his car has all these innovative ideas. And let's take a look before we start work on the car about some of Peter's innovative ideas, and we'll do a little walk around. Let's take a look at Peter's unique Miata. And we'll see that F-14 fighter jet technology incorporated into the Mazda Miata. He's got a very unique hardtop on the car. You can see it's actually a fiberglass hardtop. It's a little different than most, kind of a unique one. See how it comes around? And it has a glass rear window in the back. He's been talking about putting some opera windows in it, round windows. It might create looks like a retro kind of T-bird effect. You see he's got a wing. He's created a wing in the back. And he's got some air pressure releases, holes cut actually back in here in the trunk. In the front of the car you can see that he's created what we call these shark gills on here. It's actually a pressure release for under the hood pressure, and you can see there's a little lift on the lip here that's going to help draw the air out back. So you got a set of shark gills on both sides of the car, and we can also see this reverse scoop here. That holds this fuel pressure gauge. There's actually a fuel pressure gauge in there, and that allows Peter to actually watch the fuel pressure while he's going down the road and monitor that. You can see he also has a pressure release, a scoop here on the hood to relieve pressure again from under the hood. Let's get around to the front of the car and we'll look at how he's created some intake systems. On the front of the car, in the front bumper face, he's created these 3 intakes to help draw air into the radiator. He's made his own turn signal lights and created his own headlight system. When we lift the hood, we'll take a look at that. But underneath here, you can see his splitter. He's got a creative splitter that he's made himself. And you see how it wraps around. He's got actually a piece in there. Nice looking splitter. And let's take a look and see how he's mounted his intercooler. His intercooler is mounted actually flat. And he's going to put a scoop over the intercooler to actually draw the air through the intercooler. With the hood up, we can see the turbocharger set up. He's got a T25 turbo on there. He's going to be putting out about 8 pounds of boost with his really makes a Mazda Miata a fun car with that extra power adder. You can see the headlights here, the back of the headlights Headlights are out of an '06 Hyundai Sonata. And he says these headlights work great. Let's look over at the other side here. You can see that's his website there, MX5unleashed.com. Now the headlight that's on the left side, that's your high beam, and the headlight on your right side, that's the low beam. He says these headlights work great. When you look under the hood now, you can see those shark gills that he's created, and you can see how he actually put them in the structure between the superstructure. Great idea. You can see the other pressure release here in the center of the hood and the other shark gill. You know what we need to do is we need to get busy so Peter can get this car on the road and finish it. We're going to use the cradle the engine and remove the front subframe and suspension to remove the oil pan. Now in Peter's car you can see that he has an engine brace, a front strut engine brace. We'll have to remove the brace, and you can see that he has the engine tie-down hook on the top on the front left, but he's actually missing the hook. The hook has been removed in the rear, so we have to put a hook in there and then remove the strut tower brace, and then we're going to set up our cradle. To do that, we're just going to use wood, chain, and a solid steel bar. Now you can see how we've created the cradle, or the support for the engine. We have a block support up front that we've created around the latch assembly. And in the back we have a board actually with a notch in it. You can see it right here. And that's where the bar, this is a solid steel bar, is going to sit. We've got a chain from one engine hook wrapped around the bar, coming around and actually tied down to the rear hook that we've added to the car. You can see the rear hook right there. So now we're ready to drop out the subframe and the suspension. The Miata is now up in the lift, and we removed the bottom engine shield from underneath the car. And you can see the subframe underneath the car and the suspension. There's the lower A-arms, the subframe, and the left side lower A-arm. What we're going to do is drop out the complete suspension unit. To do that, one of the first things we have to do is release the steering rack from the steering shaft. Let's take a look at that. To continue with the video, we're going to need to take a closer look at the steering system in the Mazda Miata MX-5 1990 through 2005. The steering column is comprised of two units. There's the upper main column, and there's a lower section called the intermediate shaft. What we're going to do is we're going to separate the bottom U-joint. It connects the steering rack to the intermediate shaft. And we're going to pull the bolt out of the upper U-joint bolt that connects to the intermediate shaft. Now this is the collapsible shaft. Now we're going to take a closer look at this so you can see how this is timed. It's very important that this is taken apart correctly and then put back together correctly. Oh, this is our shop cat, Mr. Lucky. I'd like to introduce it to you. We found him in a bush. We think he was hit by a truck, because every time a truck goes by, he scats like the devil's on his tail. Let's take a closer look at the steering rack. Now this is the part we're all familiar with, the steering wheel, and this is the top of the steering column. Now the top section of the steering, the main section, runs right through here, and this is where it connects up to the U-joint, to the intermediate shaft. The intermediate shaft runs down here to a U-joint that actually runs it into the steering rack. So we got two universal joints here. The intermediate shaft, another universal joint. This universal joint is welded to the intermediate shaft. We'll take a look at that. Then you can see the steering column here. Now the upper column is also collapsible. During an accident, this section will be driven back into here, and this is a lead weight and actually a breakaway section where the steering wheel attaches to the frame of the dashboard. So that when this could, if you're driven into the steering wheel collapses here and is driven down in front of you. That's a safety feature. You can also see here, this is where the ignition lock, this is the groove that the pin or bolt of the ignition lock drops in to lock the steering. What we're going to do now is next we're going to take this intermediate shaft off, and we're going to take a closer look. To separate the intermediate shaft from the lower universal joint, we have to remove that bolt. You can see that the bolt is special. It has a long shoulder bolt on it. And then what we use is we can use a pair of vice grip pliers attached to it, and then we're going to drive it with a hammer. Now in the video, we work through the wheel well up to it. Because of Peter having the turbo, it's difficult to come down to it. But that's the easiest way, is to take away the air box that sits above it and then work down on it. Once you have the bolt out, you can actually just tap that intermediate shaft back into itself and separate the two units. Now you can see that there's a groove here, and that's where that bolt is going to run. The whole bolt is going to run through that groove. And you can also see the shaft is timed. On the back side of it, you can see here that there's an open groove. On closer inspection, we can see that there's a spline missing, and that's on the back side of the shaft. The cutaway is over here, and on the back side of the shaft, there's a spline missing. And when we look in the U-joint, on the back side of the U-joint, we can see that there's a thick section where it's going to enter that double spline. So to put this back together, it has to be timed correctly. I have the intermediate shaft separated now, and you can see this is the flat where the bolt goes through, and on the opposite side you can see where the spline is missing. That's where that thick section of the U-joint is going to enter. So if you make it just perfect, it slides in. Now this is that collapsible section. It's actually splined also. Let's see if we can see the splines on it. And you can see here how they manufactured it. They drill some holes in here and they inject nylon in here so it doesn't rattle or come loose. And actually this will actually come all the way out. Come all the way out, and you can see where that nylon has been injected through those holes. When it goes back in, this isn't timed, so it can go in back in anyway. What's important to know about this, though, if it goes in too far, it can get out of time. You can go beyond the splines inside. So let's pull it back. And we're going to line it up because the flats are with so we'll know where it goes. The flats are with the nylon holes. We're going to pull it back into place. And there it is. It's back into place. And that's it. Collapsible intermediate shaft. Very important to time it correctly and not to move the steering wheel and have those wheels straight ahead when you put it back together so you don't hurt that clock spring. Let's get back to repairing Peter's car. Behind the left front wheel, and we can see the steering shaft is right here. There's the steering shaft. Now what I've done is mark the steering shaft with a bit of white out. Right here you can see the white out. Now the bolt, the coupler is right here. I'm going to remove this bolt, and then I'm going to slide the steering shaft. The bolt has been removed from the coupler in here, and now we have a pair of vice grips attached to the steering shaft. We're going to use a long bar from the front to drive the shaft backwards and release it from the coupler. So this bar is actually coming in, and you can see where it's going to meet the vice grip pliers and then drive the shaft away. We also have to release the steering rack high side line that comes in. You can see it right here. We're going to release this line, right? And this bracket. Take the bracket and the line loose from the power steering rack so we can release the rack from the car. There's also a return hose that's right here, and we'll release the return hose also. As you can see now, we have the steering shaft separated from the coupler right here. Now once you have the shaft separated, you can see that there's a flat on the shaft, and that's where the bolt's going to go through that flat. And you can see our white mark where we timed it. So we know our steering wheel is going to be close to center and the wheel straight ahead, and then once we time it and put it back together with our white mark, our steering wheel should be as centered as it was before we proceeded. Hey, let's go over all the points of separation now, where we're going to have to separate the subframe, the items connected to the subframe, to drop it out of the car. Let's go over it first. We're going to look at all the bolts that hold it into place. One of the last bolts to come out will be the bolts that are on the subframe horn up here. You have this bolt here and another one, a large bolt, and the horns. Now we're going to release those bolts once we set this down on some milk crates, and those would be the last bolts we're going to separate. Then we have two bolts on each side in the back. We have this one here, and we have a hidden one up in here. And those are the bolts that are going to hold it together. Now we're going to have to disconnect the brake line. Well, we don't want to open the brake line, so what we're going to do is we're going to just release the caliper. So we're going to go to the bolts that hold the caliper on to the knuckle, the two bolts, and we're going to release the caliper, and then we're going to hang it from the car, from the unibody. That way we won't have to open up the brake line. We've got our calipers disconnected, and we've got them hung up here on the body, to the body, the unibody, with some wire. And we've got the bolts out of the rear of the subframe here. Here, the rear one, and then that one that's hidden up there. We got that bolt out. Now our next step is we're going to remove actually the sway bar. We're going to have to take the sway bar out of the car. See, if we drop the subframe, the sway bar is going to come, and it's going to pull all the hoses and everything. So we're going to wiggle the sway bar out of the hole next. We'll release it on both sides, and then we'll release the bolts that hold the bushings in, and then we can walk the sway bar out of place. We have the sway bar out of place now. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to want to take this breather hose right here. There's a breather hose, and that goes up to the charcoal canister. So we're going to release that. Go around front. We've already taken apart. You can see here we've taken apart the power steering main pressure line, the high side line, and we've also disconnected the return line, the hose to the pipe for the return line. So we're going to have to separate those things. Also, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take the nut off the engine mount, so the engine will stay there and the subframe come down. Let's get started on all this hardware, and we'll get it set up on the milk crates and get ready to actually drop the subframe from the car. We have all the bolts out now. We got the engine mount bolts out, and we've lowered the car down, and you can see that we've set it on two milk crates, the subframe on two milk crates. Our next step is going to be to release the top bolts that hold the shocks in place to the unibody on the top hat there, and release those main bolts that actually are right there. You can see one of them. So the main bolts, there's two of them in there. We'll release those and the top of the shock, and then we'll lift the car off the subframe. Let's go ahead and start the lift and make sure that everything's disconnected. Go slow and lift the car off the subframe. Let's make sure both shocks are loose. Everything looks good so far. We'll keep on going. So now we've got the car up in the air, the subframe separated. We're going to push the subframe back out of the way so we can work that. You can see the subframe on the milk crates now. Let's take a look and we can see where return hose was disconnected. See, this is where we disconnected that return hose from the steering rack. And this, of course, is where that high side line connected. These are where the main bolts, the last bolts we took out. Of course, we took apart the top shock bolts. The other separation point was, of course, where the engine mount meets the subframe, and the bolts in the rear. We're going to have this one and this one. Of course, we had to take out the sway bar, and also we had to take that breather hose for the charcoal vent canister. We had to take that loose. Let's push this back now and we'll take a look at the oil pan. Let's take a look at the oil pan. Boy, now the oil pan is really exposed. We can just see, we can work with ease on the oil pan now because it's completely separated and everything's out of the way. Oh, you can look at this. It looks like we got a broken engine mount. The engine mounts out of the way, the left and right engine mounts, and their brackets out of the way so we can expose the oil pan completely. Now we're going to have all the small 10mm head bolts around the oil pan to release. We'll have the dipstick to pull out. We'll have to remove the dipstick. And then we have the 4 main bell housing bolts that actually go through the bell housing into the oil pan. There's 1, 2 on the left side and 2 on the right. We have all the small bolts, 10mm head bolts, 6mm shank bolts on around the oil pan removed. We also have those main bolts that come through the bell housing removed. But let's not forget this long bolt. There's a long bolt, a hidden bolt right here, so let's not forget that one. There it is, the long bolt, 1 on each side. Let's get those out. Now we're going to separate the oil pan. So we're going to use a mallet and a pry bar. And the pry bar, where we're going to use the pry bar is right here on both sides. We're going to use a pry bar in here and a mallet, soft mallet, to knock it loose. Now what we have to be careful of is the windage tray. There's a windage tray in here and it's located right here. And we have to separate the oil pan from the windage tray. We can't pull the oil pan down with the windage tray attached because the oil pickup, that tube that Peter drilled through right here, is attached to the windage tray. So the windage tray has to stay with the engine. Let's work on that next. We now have the oil pan separated from the engine block. And now we can see that baffle shield. Here's that baffle shield we were talking about. And here's the oil pickup tube. We can see the oil pickup tube. That's where it goes into the oil pump. Here's the oil pump right here. Oil pickup tube, and that's where Peter made his boo-boo. He drilled right into it for that turbo return line. And here's the pickup. This is where the actual oil is picked up in the oil pan. Now that we have it apart, we can see that there's a seal, a lip seal up front here. Rubber lip seal, we'll replace that. And a lip seal also in the back right here. We'll replace that. Now this is the problem with removing the oil pan on these cars comes to this. If this tin, the baffle plate, shield, sticks to the oil pan, you can't separate it because the oil pickup's still attached. So it won't come apart. We're going to remove this tin, and when we remove the tin, how we're going to do it, we're going to actually use a knife, and we're going to go right to the corner of it. We'll start in the corner, and we'll drive that knife and we'll tap it along here, and we'll just release it and try not to damage it or, or hurt the metal or distort it. Then we'll clean everything up. We'll drop the pickup tube off, put another tube on it, another gasket here where it connects to the oil pump, and then we'll put in our lip seals. Once we get everything set up, we'll take another look at it. We now have the oil pan cleaned up and all the parts are ready to go. Let's take a look and see how this thing actually works. We've got another oil pickup here, and you see the oil pickup actually sits down in this section here, comes over here, and this is where it's going to connect to the oil pump. This is the front and this is the back. We've got a new gasket for our oil pump pickup. We've got the new rear main lip seal, a new front main lip seal. And then we're going to use these studs to help us put everything together. We'll take a look at those in just a second. Now here's that baffle shield. You can see the baffle shield. And the baffle shield is going to go on just like this. You can see that there's actually a recess right here. The oil pan has a recess where the shield fits into it. You can see how it's going to fit in right there. Now these studs that we talked about, the studs here, these 4 studs, now what these were actually bolts, and I just cut the heads off them. We're going to use those as guides. We're going to put those in the block, and that's going to help us put everything together. So when we put them up here, right, we're going to put 2 on each side, so that when we put up the tin, everything's going to be lined up correctly. First we have to put sealant on this surface, put the tin up, and then the oil pickup has to be bolted in place, and then gasket, and then the rear main lip seal, the front main lip seal put into place, and then a coat of sealant has to go all the way around the whole oil pan, and then the oil pan is going to go up into place. We're going to do that next. We have the oil pan back on, and you can see actually we replaced both engine mounts. That left side was broken, the right side was right behind it. And it's kind of interesting. We'll take a look at this. This is actually the engine mount here, and this is called the shoe. This actually would support the engine with a broken mount and not allow the engine to turn sideways in the car. Now the shoes are always kind of floppy. What I did was use a little bit of green tape around here to hold the shoe in place. You can see now we've got the turbo return line, the oil return line into the oil pan now, so all the reason we're doing this job has been taken care of. We also got Peter's downpipe put into place, and he's got his wide band right here. So we're ready actually now, you can see, we're ready to lower the car down to the subframe. So we have car, subframe. Now we're going to lower it down. It's closer, we're going to make some alignments, some adjustments. We got to get those engine mounts into the hole. We also have to get the front shocks in. And those horns on the subframe, we've got to get those connected to the main bolts on the subframe. Okay. We just have to make some simple adjustments and bring it down. We've got all the bolts that attach the subframe to the unibody actually in and tight now. The 2 main horn frame bolts, so we tightened those before we lifted it up. And we've got the 2 bolts in the back, in and tight. We've also got our calipers back on. But I think what's going to be interesting is how we get the sway bar in and out of the car. Well, the sway bar actually always comes out the left side. So I'm going to put this sway bar, you're going to watch me put this sway bar back in, and we're going to start in the left side. I've got no bushing bracket on this side, so I'm going to actually walk it in, I'm going to put it in. Actually, it's going to go up, and I'm going to head up and across. It looked like it was coming from. You can see where I'm coming through here, above everything. Down, and there it is. Now all I have to do is actually bolt it into place. After we finish up with the sway bar, we're going to work on that steering shaft, reconnecting it. You can see the steering shaft that I've actually entered the coupler with the steering shaft, and you see my vice grips there. And I'm just going to tap on the vice grips this way and drive that home. I've got it lined up, it's looking pretty good. Get that into place and run in that bolt, make sure it's nice and secure. We've got Peter's car all done, engine oil's in it, the engine's running, we've got good oil pressure, so the problem's gone away. Peter will be in here later today to reprogram the Megasport to run the turbo system. So this car is all done. Let's close the hood on another one, and we'll see you around the next